I didn't cry when they handed my sister the heirloom. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I smiled so wide my cheeks ached and said, "She'll love it. She's always loved Nana's things." Inside, something cold settled in my chest. Something old, heavy, and waiting. We were standing in my parents' living room, the one my father always insisted was neutral, even though every inch was covered in reminders that only one daughter mattered. Photos of my sister, Margot on horseback, Margot in Paris, Margot with her Yale graduation cap clutched in manicured fingers. The walls could barely breathe with all her accomplishments. "It's just a locket," Dad had said when I first brought it up years ago. "You can buy another." But it wasn't just a locket. It was the Smallmole's locket. The one our great-great-grandmother smuggled into England during the war, with a scrap of parchment hidden inside, etched in a language no one had translated yet. Passed down to the daughter who would protect it. That's what Nana always said. And now it belonged to Margot. After the champagne and the toast and the fake tears, I got in my car, drove to my tiny flat in Camden, and sat in the dark for a long time. Margot never even liked the locket. She used to complain it smelled like mothballs. She didn't understand it, didn't respect it. I did. I knew its weight, its history, and I knew the stories. The ones Nana told in whispers after midnight, when I was the only one still up, listening with my legs tucked under her quilt. "There's more," she'd say, fingers stroking my hair. "More than just gold and rubies. That locket is a clue, a key." I had always believed her. I still did. So when Margot posted a picture of herself at an art gala the next weekend, the locket swinging between two layers of overpriced silk-like costume jewelry, something inside me clicked. Not snapped. Clicked. Like a lock sliding open. I quit my job the next morning. It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. My boss had been hinting I wasn't a good cultural fit ever since the incident at the fundraiser, when I corrected his wife's French in front of the ambassador. But still, I packed up my things, took the potted fern I'd rescued from a rubbish bin, and walked out into the fog. I was going to find it. Not the locket, no, that part was done. I was going to find the fortune. The first step was simple: track the origin. Nana had told me the stories, yes, but she'd also left clues. In her old books, in the margin of her letters, sometimes muttered under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Her attic, now locked and filled with Margot's discarded ski gear, had once been a treasure map. I remembered the way the light caught the corner of her desk, where a stack of yellowed maps always waited. Not just British maps. Ottoman. Venetian. A hand-drawn coast labeled in Greek. I needed in. So I called Mum. "Oh, darling, Margot's not here." "I know, I'm not calling for her. I was wondering if I could pop by, just to look through some of Nana's books. I miss her." A pause. Then, "Of course." The attic still smelled like old lavender and ink. I climbed the ladder slowly, heart pounding. Once inside, I didn't waste time. I pulled aside the tartan trunk, the one Margot had labeled junk/donate. Beneath it, tucked into the wood floor, was a loose board. I pried it up with the heel of my boot. The journal was still there, wrapped in waxed cloth, leather cracked but pages dry. And inside, in Nana's tight, looping script, Kensington, 1894. First seal broken. Family must never know. I traced the letters, fingers trembling. Something pulsed through me, familiar and ancient. Then a name, E. Duval. Not English, not one of ours. French? I flipped through the pages. Dates, locations, symbols I couldn't decipher. One line was underlined 3 times in red. The guardian sleeps where iron meets stone. I stared at it. What did it mean? And who was the guardian? My phone buzzed. A message from Margot. Syme's * heirloom looks amazing with Vivienne Westwood. Everyone's asking about it. Might get it appraised. Do you remember where it came from? Mum said you were always into the history stuff. X. I stared at the screen. Appraised. She was going to sell it. She didn't care about any of it. Not the past, not Nana, not the oath whispered under moonlight. And if she sold it, the locket would vanish into some velvet-lined box, locked away by a stranger who saw only price, not promise. No, I wouldn't let that happen. I followed the trail from Kensington to a used bookstore in Bath. The name Duval was etched into a first-edition history of European relics, tucked behind a row of cookbooks. Inside was a pressed violet and a handwritten note. Forgive the sin, preserve the secret. The handwriting matched Nana's. Was Duval family? Or had Nana been protecting something far older than our line? I booked a train to Scotland that night. The journal pointed north, to a chapel ruins near the Isle of Skye, a place where iron met stone, where an old abbey had once melted cannon shells into reliquaries. I hiked there at dawn. Mist curled around my ankles. The wind howled like it remembered war. Beneath a cracked altar, I found it. A box, lead-lined and locked, the same symbol from Nana's journal carved into the lid. I held my breath and whispered the name. Duval. The box clicked. Inside, a second locket, identical to Margot's, but heavier. I opened it. Inside was a key and a folded letter. If you hold this, you are the last. The fortune lies beneath St. Vincent's. Tell no one. St. Vincent's. I knew the name. An abandoned estate in Devon, once a monastery, now a husk. I texted Mum. Going away for a bit, just to clear my head. She responded with a thumbs up. I packed everything. The journal, the map, the key, and my resolve. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was a quest, a test, a destiny passed down in shadows and ink. Margot could have the necklace. I was going to find the truth. And nothing, not Margot, not my parents, not the weight of centuries, was going to stop me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Opening scene, early morning, a dew-covered field in Devon. Wind stirring the tall grass, clouds rolling low as if dragging secrets across the sky. A narrow country road curves into the distance, flanked by stone walls laced with moss. The camera pans slowly, then stops at a solitary figure stepping out of a bus, boots landing in the mud. She's carrying a backpack, leather-bound journal clutched tightly. Her breath fogs the air. The world is quiet. When I stepped off the bus in Devon, it was like stepping out of time. The village, if you could even call it that, was 2 pubs, a petrol station, and a church missing half its steeple. The rest was rolling green hills and stories buried beneath centuries of soil. The air tasted older than memory. And somewhere out there, nestled in the ruins of an estate nobody wanted to remember, was the truth I had come to find. St. Vincent's. It wasn't marked on modern maps. I had to pull up an archived survey from the 1800s, hidden deep in the British Library's digital reserves. Even then, all it showed was a gray splotch labeled, Vincent Abbey, disused. Quote. But Nana's journal was more detailed. She'd drawn it herself. Every spire, every corridor. It had once been a monastery, then a manor, then nothing. A place people passed without seeing. I was starting to understand why. The road that led to the estate was overgrown, more animal path than trail. My boots crunched over fallen branches and stones. Somewhere to my left, a raven called out. The wind whispered my name. Or maybe I imagined that. And then I saw it. Not a ruin, not really. St. Vincent's loomed at the edge of the world, cloaked in ivy and fog. 3 stories of weather-worn stone, its windows gaping like hollow eyes. A wrought iron gate, rusted shut, marked the threshold. I slipped through a breach in the wall. The moment I crossed, my skin prickled, not from fear, from recognition. This place had waited for me. The interior was surprisingly intact. Dust thick as velvet coated the floors, but the structure itself still held. The main hall stretched into darkness, broken only by shafts of gray light spilling through stained glass. Every step echoed. I took out Nana's journal and flipped to the page she'd marked with a pressed violet. The map showed a symbol, a sun with an arrow piercing through it, carved into the floor of the central hall. It was there. I knelt, tracing the grooves with my fingers. The stone was cold, but something throbbed beneath it, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. I reached into my bag and pulled out the key I'd found in Sky. It didn't fit any lock. Because it wasn't meant to. I held it over the symbol. The air shifted. A low rumble vibrated through the stone. And then, with a hiss, part of the floor slid open. A staircase descended into the earth. I hesitated only a second before stepping down. The smell hit me first. Damp earth, old iron, something metallic and sweet. The passage twisted, narrow and uneven, until it opened into a vault. Torches lined the walls, real ones, not electric, and they were lit. Someone had been here. I swallowed hard. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. On it, a box. Not ornate, not jeweled. Just a simple iron case, etched with the same sun arrow symbol. I approached slowly. The air thickened. I opened the lid. Inside, scrolls, dozens, wrapped in oiled cloth, sealed with wax, and a medallion, tarnished but heavy, shaped like a compass. And then, a voice. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. A man stood in the corner, cloaked in shadow. Late 60s, maybe older, eyes like glacier melt, piercing. "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stepped forward. "You opened the floor. That key hasn't been used in over 100 years. "How do you know that?" He gestured to the vault. "Because I've guarded this place since I was your age, as my father did, and his before him." "Then you know what this is," I said, lifting the medallion. He nodded. "It's not a compass, it's a map." We sat by one of the torches while he explained. His name was Elias. He claimed to be part of a centuries-old line of watchers, descendants of the Duval family, tasked with guarding what they called the Covenant of Vincent. "What you found is only a fraction," he said. "The real fortune isn't gold, it's knowledge. Secrets smuggled from Constantinople before the city fell. Codes, ciphers, artifacts that could upend what the world thinks it knows about history. Then why hide it?" He looked at me with sadness. "Because power like that corrupts." I held up the medallion. "And this?" "Points to where it ends. Or begins, depends on who you ask." He pulled out a faded map and laid it next to mine. They matched. Almost. But his had a second layer, drawn in invisible ink. He held it over the torch, and lines bloomed across the parchment like veins. A route. From Devon to Portugal, across the sea to Morocco. And then Malta. The last mark, a circle labeled only Zella X in obscura. "Light and darkness," I whispered. He nodded. "The final vault, the origin of the family oath." "You said you were a guardian. Why tell me any of this?" He hesitated. Then, "Because the line ends with me. I have no children. And you." He looked at the locket around my neck. "Not Margot's, the second one. The real one. You were chosen." The next morning, I left St. Vincent's before dawn. Elias gave me the scrolls, the medallion, and something else, a name. Isidora Velasquez, Lisbon. An archivist who once tried to decode the Duval cipher and nearly lost her career over it. "She'll help you," Elias said, "if you can find her." Back in the village, I found a payphone. My mobile had no signal. Mum had left a message. "Margot says you've gone completely mad. She's upset. She wanted to show the locket to Sotheby's, but thinks it might be cursed now. Did you say something?" I laughed. "Let her think it's cursed," I muttered. "It kind of is." I booked a flight to Lisbon. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the map, the glowing lines, the words Tom Clyde Hal UX in obscura. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing truth. And truth, I was learning, had a price. In Lisbon, the air smelled like salt and baked stone. I found Isidora in a university library, her hands stained with ink, eyes sharper than any blade. She didn't trust me at first, but when I showed her the medallion, her breath caught. "This hasn't been seen in decades," she whispered. We spent hours in the archives, translating the scrolls. They were riddles, mostly. Puzzles. Warnings. One scroll ended with a phrase that chilled me. "What was buried in silence must never speak." "Why all the secrecy?" I asked. Isadora looked up. "Because if this gets out, governments fall." She wasn't joking. The documents hinted at alliances between empires never officially recorded, trade in forbidden artifacts, deals made in shadows that rewrote entire wars. "If you find the final vault," she said, "they will come for you." "Who?" "Everyone." I looked down at the map. Malta was circled in red now. 25 Lux in Obscura. That was where it ended. Or began. I booked the next ferry. And as I boarded, I felt it again. That click. Not fear. Not joy. Fate. And I knew, deep in my bones, that Margot could keep the heirloom. I was about to find the legacy. Malta didn't welcome me so much as it tested me. The wind off the sea wasn't gentle. It whipped through the harbor like a warning, dragging the scent of brine and storm into every crevice of the port. I stepped off the ferry with the medallion tucked beneath my coat, Nana's journal in one pocket, and a growing certainty in my chest. I was closer than ever, and danger was catching up. I didn't go to a hotel. I found a room in an old pension near Medina. Stone walls, crooked stairs, the kind of place that didn't ask for your last name as long as you paid in cash. The landlady, a woman in her 70s with thick eyebrows and a sharper tongue, handed me the key and said in a voice of gravel, "You're here for the catacombs, aren't you?" I froze. She smirked. "Everyone who comes alone and doesn't book a return trip is. You won't find anything down there but bones and liars." I didn't answer. I just nodded and climbed the stairs. The final vault. That's what Elias called it. Lux in Obscura. It wasn't on any official map. But Isadora and I had pieced together enough from the scrolls to narrow it down. An old Templar stronghold once buried beneath Valletta had been expanded by a secret sect of monks, then walled off when the order disbanded. The entry was lost after an earthquake in the 1600s, buried under centuries of stone and silence. Except, it hadn't been lost. The medallion wasn't just a cipher. It was a key to resonance. I'd barely believed Isadora when she said it. But she'd shown me. The medallion reacted to metal and light. Its core contained a mineral that glowed faintly when brought near ancient iron. She called it memory stone. "If it glows red," she said, "you're near the vault." And so I found myself wandering the cobbled alleys of Valletta at midnight, medallion in hand, searching for a place history had tried to erase. 3 nights. That's how long it took. I passed churches, fountains, statues weathered down to stubs, and then, in a crumbling alley beside a collapsed villa, the medallion lit up. Red. A hidden courtyard, ivy strangling a half-toppled archway. Beneath the rubble, a narrow stone door, half-sealed and carved with the sun and arrow symbol. I nearly wept. Getting in was harder. It took hours. My fingers bled from prying stone. My knees screamed from crouching. But finally, I wedged the medallion into a small cavity near the base of the door. There was a click, and the door groaned open. The air inside was thick, with dust and silence. My torch cut through the dark, revealing stairs so steep I had to crawl. Below, the vault opened into a cavern so vast it swallowed light. Pillars lined the walls, etched with unfamiliar script. Bones littered the floor, some human, some not. And in the center stood a dais. Not a treasure chest. Not a throne. A table. Atop it, a leather-wrapped bundle, aged but intact. I unwrapped it with shaking hands. Inside, documents, a codex, a set of small vials filled with dark liquid, and a letter, addressed simply, "To the final guardian." I read. And the world shifted. The fortune was never gold. It was knowledge. Buried in this vault was the record of a centuries-old society that had mapped the human genome in the 1400s. They'd cataloged bloodlines, inherited memory, synaptic triggers, things modern science hadn't begun to understand until the 21st century. They'd known about hereditary trauma, epigenetic locks, how certain memories passed not just in story but in cell. And they'd locked it away. Why? Because power breeds madness. The codex contained instructions, not for unlocking wealth, but for awakening memory, ancestral memory, controlled inheritance. If misused, it could turn people into puppets, entire generations bent to engineered will. And the final note: this knowledge belongs to no country. It must never be sold. Guard it. Die with it if you must. I left the vault just before dawn. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I felt hollow. This wasn't what I'd come for, but it was what I'd been meant to find. At the pensione, my room had been ransacked. Books torn. Clothes scattered, journal gone. My heart stopped. I ran to the front desk. The landlady raised an eyebrow. 2 men, suits, didn't say a word. Did they take anything? Only what was already hidden. She handed me a package. Nana's journal, wrapped in waxed cloth, unopened. I saw them searching, she said. I knew you'd need it. I could have kissed her. Instead, I ran. The airport was swarming. Something was wrong. Sirens. News blaring. I caught a headline on a passing screen. Archaeological heist in London. Vatican denies involvement. My blood ran cold. Isadora. I called. No answer. I sent a message. Are you safe? Please respond. It's about the vault. Then I bought a burner phone, ditched my SIM, and booked a one-way flight to Berlin. On the plane, I opened the codex again. Buried between pages was something new. A name. Not Elias, not Duval. Grimargot's Maltueur's house. Written in ink I recognized. Nana's. And beside it, the vessel without memory invites possession. I stared at the page for a long time. My sister wasn't just an entitled heiress. She was part of this. Maybe always had been. And the locket? It wasn't just a symbol. It was a seal. Whatever she'd unlocked when she wore it, whatever was waking up inside her, was tied to this codex, this legacy. And if I didn't stop it, she wouldn't just sell our past. She might destroy our future. I landed in Berlin just as dusk fell. The final clue waited in the back of the codex. A note from Elias, scrawled in pencil. If Margot wears the seal and remembers, go to the Mirror House. No address, just that. I asked around. Locals shrugged. But an old man outside the Pergamon Museum leaned in close and whispered, the Spiegelschloss. Only fools and ghosts go there. I found it by accident. A glass building half swallowed by forest. Off-grid, forgotten. Inside, everything reflected everything. No shadows. No hiding. And at the center, standing barefoot beneath the glass dome, Margot, wearing the locket, and smiling like she'd been waiting for me all along. She turned slowly. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold mirrored floor, and for one disorienting second, I saw 1,000 versions of my sister moving in perfect unison, like a ritual, like an omen. Hello, little sister, Margot said. She hadn't called me that in years. The locket around her neck pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat. I took a cautious step forward, clutching the codex against my chest. What are you doing here, Margot? She tilted her head. I should ask you the same. Last I heard, you were chasing dead languages and dusty bones. But you've gone a bit further than I expected. St. Vincent's? Malta? Berlin? You're not nearly as boring as I thought. My stomach twisted. You knew about the vault. I knew about Asterix's vault. Nana told me stories too. I just assumed they were fairy tales. Until the locket started whispering. You're lying. She stepped closer. Her eyes, once glassy with disinterest, now shimmered with something else. Awareness. Or possession. You think you're the only one who listened? She said. I heard Nana's voice long after she died. And not in dreams. In places. In mirrors. I thought I was losing my mind, but it was her guiding me. She touched the locket. And then this little thing woke up. What did you do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her smile faded. I remembered. The Spiegelschloss, Mirror Castle, was not on any public record. I'd cross-referenced the address through 4 historical archives, and all of them returned nothing. It didn't exist. At least not legally. But it was real. A glass structure in the forest, abandoned by whatever mad architect had conceived it, and built over what Elias had called a resonance fracture, a place where ancestral memory was thinnest, where the veil between past and present could be pulled back like silk. Margot had found it before me. Or something had guided her there. You don't understand what you're playing with, I said, heart pounding. That codex. I've read it, she said. My throat went dry. She turned away and walked toward the dome's center, where a raised dais held a circle of etched obsidian. Do you know why I wore the locket to the gala? She asked. Because I wanted to feel something. Anything. I felt empty for years, cold. Like I was performing the role of a person without actually being one. And then I put this on, and everything changed. I followed her carefully. It's not supposed to be used, Elias said. Elias is dead. The words hit like a slap. She turned back to me, eyes unreadable. They found him 2 days after you left, poisoned, quietly, no headlines, no fuss. Grief roared through me. My legs buckled. I didn't kill him, Margot added quickly, but someone wanted to close the line, end the Guardians. Who? I don't know, yet. I wanted to believe her. But the way she stood there, so poised, so calm, so certain, it was like she was no longer just Margot. Or maybe she was finally the version of herself I never wanted to admit existed. You need to take the locket off, I said. Whatever's inside it, whatever's waking up, it's not safe. It's not about safe, she said. It's about remembering. The mirror dome began to hum. Low at first, then rising, a vibration in my bones. Margot stepped into the obsidian circle. The locket flared with light. Runes along the base of the dais illuminated, one by one, until the entire platform was glowing. I stepped back, shielding my eyes. Margot! I can see them, she whispered. Who? Our blood, our mothers, their mothers. Back to the ones who held fire in caves and whispered their names to the stars. She collapsed to her knees. I ran forward and caught her. Her skin burned. Margot! She looked up at me, dazed. It's not me, it's her. She wants to speak. Who? Nana? No, she said. Older. Then her mouth opened. But the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was ancient, female, woven with languages that hadn't been spoken in 2,000 years. I recognized one word. Custodia. Guardian. The locket cracked. And the light vanished. Margot collapsed in my arms. The glass dome went still. Outside, the wind had stopped. I carried her from the dais and laid her gently on the floor. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The locket had split open. Inside, something pulsed faintly. Not a gem. Not metal. A sliver of preserved brain matter, wrapped in gold filament. The codex had mentioned this. The seed. Not metaphor. Literal. Memory, encoded biologically, passed down through blood. Activated by proximity to sacred sites, it wasn't magic. It was a science lost before science had a name. And Margot had just awakened it. I spent the next day hiding. In Berlin, no one blinked at a woman sprinting from the woods with a backpack and a bloody lip. I found a hostel, locked the door, and pored over the codex again. Every symbol, every map, every line. The seed wasn't meant to awaken in just anyone. It was meant for the Teichte vessel. Someone born into a precise bloodline, a genetic pattern carried forward from one woman to the next. The guardian protected the vessel. I was the guardian. And Margot? She was the vessel. No matter how much I resented her, hated her entitlement, her narcissism, none of it mattered. She was the key. And now that she'd awakened the seed, she would become the target. I tried calling her. No answer. I went back to the Spiegelschloss. It was empty. No Margot, no light, no glass. The entire structure had vanished. Only the trees remained. 2 days later, a note arrived. No postage, no envelope, just slid under my door. It said, Times * Prague. Follow the lion, M***. I packed my bag, again. And as I boarded the train, I felt it. The whisper. Not words. A pulse, a pull. The seed, calling. Whatever Margot had become, whoever she was now, she needed me. And I wasn't going to let the world bury our truth. Not this time. Opening scene, Prague, pre-dawn. Fog curling through cobbled alleys like breath held too long. Church bells in the distance toll softly, out of sync with time. The sun is still buried behind the horizon. Street lamps cast long shadows across statues worn smooth by centuries of wind and war. The lion found me before I found it. It wasn't Margot, not yet. It was stone. A massive sculpture in front of an old Baroque library, its mane carved in the style of Czech mythology, eyes fixed westward toward the old bridge. Nana used to tell me stories about this lion, the one that guards forgotten truths. Carved beneath it in Latin. Spiritas dormit, sed non perit. Truth sleeps but does not die. And on the lion's paw, taped casually like a forgotten flyer, was a note with a single word, Cellarium. The cellar. I turned toward the library. The doors were locked, but the basement had a side entrance hidden behind scaffolding and stone crates. It was open, just barely. I slipped inside. The cellar beneath the Clementinum library was older than the books it guarded. I moved slowly, torchlight flickering off limestone walls. Rats scurried between shelves of brittle scrolls. Dust danced in beams of lantern light. And at the far end, past rows of forgotten knowledge, I saw her. Margot. Sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, the split locket beside her. Her hands moved rhythmically through a box of small, carefully packed relics. She looked up. You found the lion. I didn't speak, just crossed the room. What is this place? I finally asked. She gestured around. Where the Jesuits stored the texts they didn't want anyone to find, some of them older than the church itself. I knelt beside her. Are you all right? She gave a small, bitter laugh. Define all right. I'm remembering things that didn't happen to me. Waking up reciting names of ancestors who died before Rome was a city. Every time I close my eyes, I see fires. Altars. Women kneeling and bleeding for secrets no one should ever have known. My stomach twisted. You've triggered a full awakening. Yes. Why didn't you wait for me? Because I didn't trust you. I flinched. She sighed. I do now, but this isn't something that makes you better. It just opens you. And once you're open, you can't close again. We worked in silence for hours. The relics she had uncovered, mostly from Jesuit collections, hidden beneath false citations, were pieces of the Codex Lux. Apparently the scrolls I'd found were only fragments. The full text had been broken apart during the 30 Years' War and scattered across Europe to keep any one person from gaining too much power. The vault in Malta, I said. It wasn't the end. No, Margot said. Just the first chamber. The codex is in pieces. And someone's already gathering the others. I froze. Who? She met my gaze. I don't know yet. But they were tracking Elias. They moved on Isadora, and they'll come for us. I swallowed. Then we move first. She smiled. For the first time, it wasn't cruel. It was tired, real. We traced the next location through marginalia in an 18th century edition of *Speculum Angelorum. In the binding, a key. Old silver, etched with the sun and arrow symbol. It led us to Salzburg. The monastery sat high in the Alps, half collapsed from an avalanche in the 30s, rebuilt, then abandoned again. We arrived in snow. The monks who once lived there had used the underground passages to preserve relics through multiple wars. One tunnel, barely a crawl space, led into the mountain itself. We lit our torches and followed. Margot moved like she was being pulled by strings. Her hands trembled. Her voice changed when she read inscriptions, tones deeper, ancient. She was becoming someone else. No, not someone else. All of them. Every vessel before her. Every voice stitched into her blood. At the end of the tunnel, we found another vault. This one was carved entirely from ice. Ancient, preserved by natural fault lines. Inside, a woman. Frozen in place. Her eyes were open. In her hands, the second codex fragment. Margot stepped forward and whispered, "Custodia iterum." The ice cracked, and the vault opened. Asterisk. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Asterisk. The woman in the ice did not blink. Her skin was pale, translucent in some places, pulled tightly across bone. Yet her expression was not one of fear. It was deliberate, as though she had chosen to freeze herself mid-breath, mid-oath. The codex fragment she clutched had fused with her fingers. Etched into its leather cover was the same symbol as on the locket, but more elaborate, surrounded by constellations. Margot didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her breath visible in the frozen air, and pressed both palms to the surface of the ice. Nothing happened. Then she began to speak. Not in English. Not in any language I knew. It was song. Low, rhythmic, like a prayer that predated sound. The ice began to melt, just around the woman's hands. The rest stayed solid, as if the mountain itself held her captive. Slowly, reverently, Margot reached forward and pried the fragment free. The woman's eyes closed. And a whisper, no more than a thought, curled through the air. Asterisk, one more remains. Asterisk. Back at our guest house in Salzburg, we examined the fragment. It wasn't a codex like the others. It was a diagram. A map. Not geographical. Anatomical. A woman's form, drawn in gold ink on ancient vellum, her organs labeled in runes we couldn't translate. At the center of her chest, the symbol, but inside it, this time, were coordinates. Margot traced them with one finger. These are modern. I typed them into my phone. Bulgaria. A monastery buried in the Rhodope Mountains. According to the records, it had been destroyed in 1917 by an avalanche. But recent satellite data showed something still stood there, something underground. A third vault. We flew to Sofia, then drove 6 hours along roads that disappeared into rock. Margot barely spoke. Her voice had grown hoarse since Salzburg, her skin paler. She was changing. Inside. I watched her sleep during the drive. Her hand kept drifting to the cracked locket. Even broken, it pulsed faintly. She muttered in her sleep, names. Dozens of them. None I recognized. When we arrived, it was nearly midnight. The monastery had been reduced to foundations, overtaken by moss and trees. But beneath the altar, we found a stone slab. Not hidden. Waiting. Margot knelt. "I think this one's not for me," she said. I looked down. Etched into the stone. Asterisk. The guardian shall pass first. Asterisk. The tunnel was narrow and wet. Deeper than Malta. Darker than Salzburg. I moved slowly, torch in one hand, other brushing the wall to steady myself. At the bottom, a door. Not wood. Not metal. Bone. I didn't question it. I pressed the medallion from Malta into the center. The door sighed open. Inside, a library. But not books. Memories. Dozens of figures stood motionless in alcoves, like statues. But they weren't stone. They were people. Or had been. Each wore a locket. Each held an artifact. As I stepped forward, I felt it. The codex in my bag pulsed. 1,000 voices swelled in my head. Fragments of thoughts, lives, fears. Then one spoke clearly. "You are the last guardian." I turned. A woman stood behind me, young, dressed in simple robes. Her eyes shimmered with violet light. I don't understand," I said. She smiled. "You will, but only if she survives." "Margot?" She nodded. "She carries them all now, every vessel, every voice. If she dies unanchored, the seed will scatter, the codex will fracture, and those who hunt it will come for you next." Who are they? Not enemies, not allies. Just echoes who forgot they were once human. She held out her hand. I took it. And in a burst of light, I saw everything. When I came to, Margot was at the entrance. She looked terrified. "You were gone for hours," she whispered. "I wasn't," I said. "Not really." She helped me up. I handed her the last fragment. And then the cave began to shake. "Time to go," she said. We ran. The entrance collapsed behind us. The mountains sealed the vault again. Back in Sofia, we reviewed the 3 fragments side by side. Together, they formed a sequence. Not instructions. A ritual. A final act. One that required 2 people. One to hold the seed. One to guard it. "We're almost there," I whispered. Margot met my gaze. But her eyes were no longer just hers. They were legion. We crossed into Serbia by rail, avoiding airports. Margot slept most of the journey, not like before, when she'd murmur names or twitch with half-dreamed memories. This sleep was deeper, quieter, and terrifying. I sat across from her in the compartment, staring out at endless tracks and winter hills, knowing that every minute we waited, we grew closer to whatever the ritual was leading toward. I didn't know the destination. But Margot did. Even in sleep, her hand rested on the codex fragments. Her fingers twitched as though turning pages only she could see. The map had changed. Not visibly, not to the naked eye. But when I scanned the vellum under UV light in a Belgrade hotel room, a new layer appeared. A line. Curved. Spiraling inward toward a symbol I didn't recognize. Not sun and arrow. Something older. A woman's silhouette, encircled by 13 stars. The coordinates pointed to Transylvania. Not the Dracula myth. The real one. The forest where 13 sisters were buried. The legend said they weren't saints. They were keepers. And one would rise when the others fell. Margot whispered in her sleep, "The motherless 13. I booked us a car. We drove east. The Carpathians are not kind. They rise like teeth, gray and jagged, and the forest never opens willingly. We abandoned the car after the second landslide blocked the road, packed light, hiked 6 miles into fog and silence. No signs, no trail, just trees and whispers. I thought I imagined them at first. But Margot turned, slowly, her face bone white. "They remember me," she said. Then she walked into the trees. I followed. The clearing was shaped like a spiral. 13 stones, black, uneven, each carved with a name and a language that burned to look at. Margot stepped into the center. She fell to her knees and screamed. It wasn't pain. It was release, Straeros. Light erupted from her chest, pure, violet, ancient. The locket flared, the fragments floated into the air, and the earth cracked open beneath her. I rushed forward. The ground gave way. We fell. We landed in silence. Not the absence of noise, something deeper. A void. We were inside a dome, underground, perfectly round, the ceiling painted with stars that shifted as we moved. At the center, a cradle, made of gold, empty, until Margot approached. She placed the codex fragments into it. They fused. Then she stepped in. I grabbed her arm. Wait. Quote, she looked at me, not as my sister, as all of them. I remember the ritual now, she said. It's not about power, it's about rebirth. I don't want to lose you. You never had me, she whispered, but you were meant to hold what's left. Then she placed her palm on my forehead. Light, pain, memory, and then she was gone. Not dead. Nam sashing seven to teary. Sashing seven to teories. The cradle closed and sank into the earth. I woke outside the spiral. Snow falling gently. No Margot. Just a medallion in my hand. Etched with the 13th symbol. And beneath it, Cham's asterisk. She lives in you now, protect her. Asterisk. I closed my fist around it. And began to walk. Not home. There was no home. Only the path forward. Only the truth. Only the next step in the line. 3 days after Margot disappeared into the cradle, I crossed the Danube alone. The medallion burned against my skin. Not literally, not quite. But I felt its weight constantly, like a second heartbeat in my chest, like gravity had grown its own opinion. I walked through villages that had never appeared on Google Maps, slept in ruins, ate when I remembered. My phone was gone. It had vanished along with the codex, sucked into the ritual, or the earth, or something I still didn't understand. All I had left were the clothes on my back, a journal with half a page of notes, and Margot's medallion. And her. Because she wasn't gone. Not exactly. She spoke to me sometimes. Not with words, not like she used to, but in pulses, impressions, a flash of memory that wasn't mine, a scent, a name, a date. And each time I wrote it down. Because the story wasn't over. It was evolving. The first name she gave me was Eliana Drukov. I found her in Bucharest, working at a university archive no one visited. She didn't look surprised when I walked in. You're late, she said in flawless English. The sisters said you would come last week. I stared. She slid a thick envelope across the desk. Inside, a letter, handwritten in looping Cyrillic. A photograph of the 13th symbol, this time etched into the ceiling of a cathedral. And a list of coordinates. Each one with a single word beside it. New Elise, Elise, I asked. Echoes of the seed, she said. Margot didn't carry everything. The fragments still ripple, each site holds a sliver, and someone is collecting them. I felt my pulse quicken. Who? She didn't blink. You. The next 3 weeks blurred. I moved from country to country, riding mail trains and broken ferries, walking for days through ravines and snow. At each coordinate, I found something left behind. A bell that chimed with no wind. A woman's braid sealed in amber. A book of prayers, all blank. Each object pulsed faintly when I touched it. Each one whispered. And each one added to the noise in my head. Memories not mine. Faces I'd never seen. Languages I hadn't studied, but suddenly understood. Margot was merging with me. But not just Margot. All of them. Every vessel. Every echo. In Tallinn, I found a mirror that didn't reflect my face. Only hers. Margot. Smiling, calm. You're doing well, she said. I touched the glass. I don't want to be the guardian anymore. I didn't want to be the vessel, she replied. But you accepted it. She nodded. Because it was bigger than me. And then she faded. I returned to London in spring. The city felt foreign. Mum met me at the train station, tears in her eyes. She hadn't heard from either of us in 4 months. I thought you were dead, she whispered. I think I was, I said. I didn't tell her about the vaults, or the codex, or Margot. I just hugged her, hard. But as I stepped into the flat, something shifted. My father's old globe, untouched for years, was spinning. No windows open, no draft. And when it stopped, the needle pointed to South America. Brazil. Another echo. Another memory. The ritual wasn't complete. It had only just begun. I arrived in Sao Paulo under a sky smeared with copper. The heat was a living thing, dense, relentless, humming with electricity. I hadn't been back to the Americas in years, and everything here moved louder, brighter, faster. But as soon as I stepped off the plane, I felt it again. The pull. The medallion at my chest had grown hotter with every mile. The 13th symbol shimmered faintly now, a soft violet glow pulsing in sync with something I couldn't see. I kept it hidden beneath my shirt. Too many people stared already. Something in me had changed since Transylvania, and strangers sensed it. They stepped aside without knowing why. It wasn't power. It was presence. Margot was with me, always. But so were others now. Faces I had never known, whispers I hadn't asked for. And Brazil somehow felt like the end of something. Or the beginning of the real end. The coordinates Ileana had provided pointed to a place deep within the Atlantic forest, a reserve partially swallowed by illegal logging and forgotten political promises. Access was restricted. But there was always a way. I hired a guide named João. He didn't ask many questions. Just glanced once at the edge of the medallion when it caught the light and said, in Portuguese, "The forest eats what it remembers. Be careful what you wake." We rode horses most of the way, then walked, then climbed. 2 days in, the GPS died. The compass spun, and the forest began to change. Trees grew in spirals, unnaturally symmetrical. Vines hummed, and the deeper we went, the more I dreamed of fire. The site was a stone ziggurat half consumed by jungle, not Incan, not Aztec, something older. João stopped 50 feet from it and wouldn't go further. "This place remembers blood," he said. I didn't argue. I climbed alone. At the summit, a bowl-shaped depression filled with water that reflected nothing. Not sky, not me. Just black. And in the center, a silver rod jutting from the stone etched with 13 stars. I pulled the medallion from my chest. The moment it touched the rod, the ground shook, and the water whispered. Not a voice, a memory. Margot, laughing, then screaming, then silence. And then, below, I descended into the temple through a stairwell choked with moss. Inside, murals. A woman kneeling, a circle of stars, a cradle of ash. Each wall told a version of the same story. Birth, death, rebirth. And at the center of the chamber, a sarcophagus. Open. Empty. Except for a mirror. I looked. Not at myself. At Margot. She stood behind me, wearing the first locket. Smiling. "I remember everything now," she said. And then the mirror shattered. I woke surrounded by strangers. Monks. Or something like them. Their robes were stitched with constellations. Their eyes glowed faintly violet. One stepped forward and pressed a hand to my forehead. "You are the last link," she said. "The final gate." "What gate?" I whispered. "The one they cannot open unless you say yes." I pulled away. "Who are they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held up a piece of the codex. It was new. Or maybe old and only just revealed. It showed a diagram of Earth, of veins pulsing beneath it, ley lines. But at the center, not a temple, not a vault, a girl. Me. "Margot passed the seed to you," the monk said. "But the vessel is no longer a person. It is time. The ritual completes when time accepts you." They gave me a choice. Walk away. Forget. Or take the codex into the core of the world. Complete the inheritance. Guard it forever. I chose neither. I asked for one more day. They agreed. I climbed back out of the temple. Chao was gone. So was the forest. In its place, a field of mirrors, each reflecting a version of me. One young, one old, one broken, one whole, and in the center, Margot. Not as she died, as she would have lived, if we'd had time. She touched my hand through the glass and whispered, "Say yes." I closed my eyes, and did. When I opened my eyes, the mirrors were gone. So was the jungle. So was the sky. There was only white. Endless, luminous white. No shadows, no horizon. It didn't feel like floating. It felt like being. Not standing, not breathing, just present. And then I heard her again. Margot. But not as I remembered. Her voice was layered now, wider, deeper, part of a chorus that pulsed behind every syllable. You said yes. I did. Then the gate has opened. Something shifted. A doorway appeared in the light. Not a real door, more like an absence. A perfect rectangle of shadow cut into the brightness. Go, she said. Where does it lead? To everything. I stepped through. I found myself in a room with no walls. But it held memories. Mine, Margot's, Nana's. The voices of the vault, the faces of the monks, the frozen guardian in Salzburg, Ilyana's quiet stare, the echo braids, the codex pieces floating like dust motes. They orbited me. And then I heard the heartbeat. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Margot's. It was the world's. Each thump carried a memory, a birth, a death, a war, a kiss, a betrayal. The laughter of a child in 400 BC. The scream of a woman burned at the stake. The silence of a vow made in a monastery no one remembered. And I felt them all at once. Overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. I fell to my knees. The medallion rose off my chest and hovered, then disintegrated into light. And the codex fragments burned away. Ashes of truth, swirling into a spiral. And from that spiral, a voice. Times asterisk choose. No asters. No asterisk choose. I saw them. 2 paths. One led to a tower of glass, high above the clouds, where the seed would be sealed. Kept from humanity, hidden, protected. No one could abuse it again. The other led to a root system that pulsed beneath every continent. The seed would be distributed, piece by piece, into the dreams of every human on Earth, a whisper of truth in every mind. No more secrets. No more heirs. Just evolution. But chaos, too. Uncontrolled awakening. Which future is better? I asked. The voice didn't answer. Because the voice was Kame Seiken. And the choice was mine. I chose the route. Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't choose silence. Margot didn't die to keep the past locked away. She died to pass it on. So I touched the spiral. And the world broke open. I woke in my bed in Camden. The flat looked the same, except the air hummed. And when I opened the window, the sky blinked. Not metaphor. Light shimmered. For 1 second, the entire city paused. And then moved on. But something had shifted. People walked a little slower. Listened a little closer. A child at the bus stop stared at me and said, "You glowed yesterday." I smiled. "Did I?" He nodded. "You said the stars, remember?" I closed the window, pulled on a coat, and walked into the day. Not a guardian, not a vessel, just a woman who remembered and would never forget. It started with the dreams. I didn't expect anything. I had woken up in my own bed, in the city I grew up in, with no codex, no medallion, and no vault key burning against my chest. The war was over. Or so I thought. But 3 nights after I returned to Camden, I began to dream of doors. They weren't symbolic, they were specific. One was green, cracked paint, a brass knocker shaped like a serpent. Another was polished mahogany, set into a red rock cliff. A third was half-rotted, swinging gently in a wind I couldn't feel. Every night, new doors. And on the 6th night, I opened one. I stepped into a garden I had never seen before, terraced, glowing with purple tulips that shimmered like silk. A woman stood at the far end, facing away. She was humming. I took one step closer, and she turned. It was me, but not me. Older, stronger, eyes burning with galaxies. She smiled and said, "The seed took root, now you must water it." I woke in sweat and silence. The window was wide open. Wind curled across the floor. And on my nightstand, where I kept my old paperback copy of Nana's favorite fairy tale, a single violet petal rested. I didn't remember owning flowers. The next day, I went to the British Library. I had no plan, no map, I just walked, following instinct. It pulled me past the reading rooms, past the globe sculpture, and down into the underground archive levels where few people ever went. I flashed a borrowed ID, one I hadn't used since grad school. No one questioned it. I found myself drawn to a shelf labeled **** Folklore and Forbidden Histories. ** Book caught my eye. Hand-bound, no title on the spine. When I opened it, a small card fluttered out. Times ***, you are being watched but not followed. ***. I looked up. No one. But I knew what it meant. The echoes hadn't stopped. They'd spread. That afternoon, I took a train to Oxford. I hadn't been there since I was 19. But the Bodleian's Upper Tower archive had something I remembered reading about in Nana's letters. A sealed collection labeled simply ***, Inheritance Private ***. Most scholars thought it was part of the Montague estate, a redacted collection of political treaties from the 1700s. But Nana had hinted otherwise. In the margins of her last letter before she passed, she'd written, "To us ***. The Bodleian remembers, but it won't speak unless you ask as I asked. ***." And I remembered the word she taught me when I was 10. A word she said would open more than doors. I found the collection, pressed my hand against the seal, whispered the word Tuar Chis Trai, Hachalithia. Hachalithia, truth. The latch popped. Inside were 3 things: a map, a vial of ash, and a key shaped like a ribcage. The map wasn't a geography. It was a timeline, but not ours. Events I didn't recognize, names erased. Every 100 years, a flare symbol. I recognized the most recent one. The day Margot disappeared. The next flare was only 10 years away. The seed was on a cycle. It had always been. I took the train back to London and walked the streets in a daze. The world hadn't changed visibly, but people knew. Children whispered phrases they couldn't have learned. Old women looked at me and wept. A man on the tube handed me a page torn from a Bible, with the verse ***, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. No context, just truth. The seed had bloomed, and now the world was reacting. I returned to my flat that evening and found a letter slid under the door. No stamp, no name, just a symbol burned into the paper, a circle of thorns. Inside, a single line. 20 ***, you are not the only root. ***. My hands trembled, because that meant what I feared. Others had awakened. Some would want to protect the inheritance. Others would want to twist it. And some would want to burn it all down. The doorbell rang. I opened it. No one there. Just a box. Inside, A shard of mirror. And Margot's voice, faint, layered, barely audible. You must find the others. Before the next flare. Or we all burn. The shard of mirror sat on my kitchen table for hours before I dared to touch it again. It was smooth, cool, and somehow still. No more whispering, no voice, just a piece of reflection that seemed to hum beneath the silence. But I could feel her inside it, Margot, watching, waiting. The warning had been clear. Torn in percent, asterisk, you are not the only root. Torn in percent. And that meant the others were moving too. Maybe they had always been moving. I looked back at the map from the Bodleian archive. The timeline was clearer now. The flare pattern traced not just forward, but backward. Margot's disappearance was only the most recent ignition. There had been one in 1924, another in 1822, one in 1721. Always spaced. Always masked by something else. Plagues, revolutions, floods. But beneath the surface, each flare had activated a new generation of echoes, of roots, of bearers. If I was one, then who were the others? I started in Norway. Why? Because the mirror shimmered when I held it up to a journal entry Margot wrote during our teenage years. We'd gone on a school trip to Oslo. She'd doodled a compass rose in the margins and scrawled the word Lyset below it. Light. The shard pulsed when I whispered the word. I booked a flight the next morning. In Oslo, I went to the Viking Ship Museum first. It felt right, heavy with inheritance. Something in the iron of the longboats made the mirror ache in my pocket. And in the Hall of Textiles, I met her. The first other. Her name was Astrid Nyholm. She worked in restoration. Quiet, thin, blue gloves and sharper eyes than anyone I'd met since Elias. I didn't introduce myself. I simply pulled the mirror from my pocket and held it out to her. She gasped. "You've heard them too." I nodded. We sat in the museum's back office, surrounded by glass and steel, while she told me her story. Her echo had begun 2 years earlier. In dreams. Then in fire. She'd nearly died in a cabin collapse in the north, had stopped breathing for 4 minutes. When she came back, she had someone else's memories. A weaver, a shield maiden, a monk. Not past lives, nouveau impressions, the voiminogentories. Fragments of the seed. I thought I was mad, she whispered. Until the mirror arrived. It came to you? She nodded. By Raven, no joke. I believed her. The second was in Marrakesh. His name was Idris Taleb, a mathematician who moonlighted as a calligrapher. I found him in a souk, carving impossible patterns into a copper bowl. When I showed him the shard, he laughed for a full minute. Finally, he said, I've been waiting for someone to speak the old numbers. Idris didn't see the echoes in dreams. He saw them in patterns. Fractals in tea leaves, spirals in sand, equations that shouldn't work but did. He'd begun drawing the flare cycle 6 months before the last one, without knowing what it was. They're not just sparks, he told me. They're rhythms. Memory has a tempo, and the seed is a metronome. I stayed in Marrakesh 3 nights. On the second night, Astrid called. Someone followed me home. My blood went cold. Did they speak to you? No, but they carried the circle of thorns. The third was in Kyoto. She didn't speak. She only wrote. Her name was Aika. I found her in a temple garden, sketching with charcoal. Her pages were filled with eyes, thousands of them. When I showed her the mirror shard, she placed her hand on mine, and I saw them. Not memories, warnings. The thorned circle was growing. They weren't like us. They didn't want to inherit. They wanted to consume. They are seeking the source, Aika wrote, the first root. Do you know where it is? She hesitated, then nodded. Buried beneath where time was broken. That meant nothing to me, but the mirror pulsed. And when I asked Astrid and Idris, they both said the same thing. The rift. The place where time paused. The zero flame. I didn't know what it meant. But Margot's voice finally returned. Not through the shard. Through the air. Soft. Stern. Final. If they reach it first, the seed will rot. Where is it? I asked. You already saw it, she said. In the garden, in the tulips, in yourself. And then I understood. The first root wasn't a place. It was me. The first root wasn't a myth, or a mountain, or a map. It was a person. It was me. Somehow, somewhere in the evolution of the seed, after centuries of vessels and guardians and fragments passed hand to hand in fire, ink, and silence, something had split, and I wasn't just a descendant of the line. I was its convergence. I carried every echo now, every memory Margot had absorbed, every face Astrid had dreamed, every equation Idris had written, every eye Aika had drawn. And if I fell, so would the rest. I met them all again in Prague. We didn't plan it. The mirror summoned us, all of us. I arrived first, stepping out of the train station just before sunrise. Astrid was already waiting, wrapped in a green coat, her breath forming short clouds. Idris appeared an hour later, pulling a worn leather satchel behind him, eyes bloodshot but alert. Aika didn't take the train, she walked. From the hills, as if she'd been there before we arrived. None of us spoke right away. We didn't need to. Because in the center of Old Town Square, where tourists usually gathered to photograph the astronomical clock, there was something no one else seemed to see. A door. Cracked wood, no frame, hovering 2 inches off the cobbled ground. And carved into the top plank. Plies asterisk 13. Asterisk 13. When we opened the door, the world blinked. One moment, we stood in Prague. The next, we were somewhere else. A room of glass and shadows, shaped like a rose turned inside out. Each petal was a memory. I saw Nana, Elias, Margot, the cradle, the vault, the frozen woman in Salzburg. All of it blooming around us. And in the center, a flame, suspended in air. White hot, but cold, familiar. We stepped closer. Aika reached out first. Her fingers brushed the flame. She collapsed. We caught her. Her eyes fluttered, then opened wide. They've already found it, she said. Who? I whispered. She didn't answer. But the room did. The rose shadows curled inward, and the thorned circle stepped through. There were 6 of them, all dressed in black, faces hidden behind cracked porcelain masks. The tallest one spoke. You are not fit to hold what was meant to die. I stepped forward. You don't understand the seed. He tilted his head. We do. That's why we want it gone. Astrid gripped my wrist. They've been trying to reset the flare cycle, end it permanently. Idris added, if they succeed, the entire inheritance is erased. Every voice, every echo, every truth. The leader of the circle took a step forward. And the flame shuddered. The memory room began to fragment. I felt Nana slipping away. Margot's voice stuttered. Aika fell to her knees. And then Astrid said the only thing that made sense. Fuse us. What? I said. Make us one. Just for a moment. The first root has that power. If we're one, they can't sever us. But now, Idris said. I closed my eyes, held their hands, and reached for the flame. It burned. Not pain. Transformation. I felt their minds blend into mine. Their lives, hopes, secrets, all of it. We became one root. The flame pulsed, then expanded. And in that burst of light, the thorned circle screamed. The room collapsed. And we fell. I woke in my flat. alone. The mirror shard was gone. So were the others. But on my arm, 13 new scars. One for each of us. And on the window, written in condensation, times asterisk, they're not finished. Asterisk. The condensation vanished before I could touch it. Just like the others. No Idris, no Aika, no Astrid. Only the scars on my arm, still raised, still warm, like fresh ink drawn into skin by heat instead of blade. Mot motred. Note mood motred. Note mood tred moot. Mood mood. Conplan mood. The words echoed louder than any scream. I didn't know if it was a warning from Margot, a remnant from the fused memory field, or something more primal, something else that had seen the flame and was still watching. It didn't matter, because I knew what came next. If the thorn circle couldn't sever us at the flame, they would try again. But not in dreams. Not in memory. In the flesh. I went to ground. I burned my passport, bought a burner phone, paid in cash, booked a night train to Vienna, and disappeared. I couldn't risk drawing them to anyone else I loved. Mom! The archivists. The people who had helped me. I was radioactive now, a beacon. I wore gloves to hide the scars, sunglasses to hide the stutter of light in my eyes that still hadn't stopped since the flame. And I waited, because I didn't need to find them anymore. They would come. And when they did, I had to be ready. The first attack came in Krakow. I was sitting in a cafe, sketching patterns into a notebook just to keep my fingers moving, when a man in a black coat took the seat across from me. He said nothing, just placed a chess piece on the table between us. A queen. And then he pulled back his sleeve and revealed his wrist. 13 scars. But his weren't healed. They bled. His mouth opened, and he whispered, "Reset." Before I could stand, he was gone. I checked my notebook. The page I had been drawing on was blank, except for 2 new words. Times asterisk, Budapest. 7 days, asterisk, times axax. I got there in 6. Rented a flat near the Fisherman's Bastion. High ground. Too many tourists for anyone to move violently without being noticed. I carried no weapons. Just the mirror shard I had managed to recover from beneath my floorboards, its edges dulled from wear. And the map. Not the original Codex chart. Something new I'd begun to draw since Prague. An instinctual map, not of roads, but pulses. I could feel where the echoes shimmered in the world now. They weren't just people anymore. They were places. Tanab moments, Nitz. And something in Budapest hummed like a tuning fork pressed against bone. On the 3rd day, I found another door. Not the floating kind, not mystical. A real, solid door in a tunnel beneath Castle Hill. Steel, unmarked, locked. Except it opened for me without resistance. Inside, 13 mirrors. Lined in a circle. All facing inward. And standing in the center, Margot. Except not. She was taller. Her hair longer. Her eyes burned violet gold. She smiled. "This is the final locus," she said. "Is this you?" I whispered. She nodded. "And not. I'm what's left when Margot dies and the seed finishes blooming. I am what you would become if you said yes again." I stepped forward. "So what happens now?" She raised her hands. "They come. All of them. The circle, the unaligned, the sleeping echoes, everyone." "For me?" "For it." She looked at the mirror shard in my hand. "And it crumbled to ash." I barely escaped. Not from her, from them. When I left the tunnel, the city had changed. The sky pulsed red. Not visible to everyone, just those who remembered. I ran until my lungs tore, hid inside an abandoned synagogue. And I waited again. But this time, not alone. Because at midnight, Idris appeared. His coat soaked, his eyes bruised. "Ika's gone," he said. Dead? He shook his head. Worse, taken. By the circle? No, he said, by something inside her. One of the echoes. It broke free. We knew then. The seed wasn't perfect. It remembered everything. Even the parts that should have stayed buried. And now one of them walked in Aika's body. We didn't know where it would go next. But the flare was close. Too close. The last cycle was 10 years out. But something was accelerating. And when I checked my scars that night, one was gone. The 13th. Just vanished. And in its place, a single phrase appeared. Nime, asterisk, you are the key, asterisk. The words stayed on my skin even when I scrubbed them. Copre's emotion, you are the key. It wasn't metaphor. It was function. Margot's final whisper, Idris's warning, even Aika's disappearance. Everything pointed to one truth. If the flare ignited early, it wouldn't wait for a ritual. It would choose a bearer, a sacrifice, a reset. And if I was the key, then the choice had already been made. The next sign came not through fire, but sound. A low hum, just at the edge of hearing, vibrating through buildings, floors, subways. It wasn't constant, but when it came, it made my teeth ache. Idris heard it too. It's counting down, he said. To what? Not a flare, a rupture. Of what? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because 2 days later, the sky split. It happened in the early hours over Lisbon. A seam of light cracked open across the sky, visible only to those who carried the seed. Planes were grounded, dogs howled, and across Europe, 13 individuals collapsed at once. All of them linked to one thing. They bore echoes. They didn't die. They emptied. Their bodies remained. But what lived inside them, the memories, the inheritance, evacuated. Into the world. Into me. Idris and I felt it first. We were sitting on a rooftop in Bratislava, scanning the map he'd drawn in chalk when it hit. Like a bolt. Every echo, every remnant, every fragment that had nowhere else to go poured into me like smoke into a bottle. I screamed. My vision shattered. And when it cleared, I could see everything. They weren't just memories anymore. They were smor monorez. A battlefield in Constantinople, 1453. A tower in Carthage burning in 146 BC. A girl in a cave in Siberia, drawing constellations on a stone wall. I saw all of them, heard all of them, and understood, finally, what the seed truly was. Not history, not memory. It was humanity's core. The record of not what we were, but what we could have been. Potential, filtered across lifetimes, waiting for one mind to carry enough of it to choose the future. And now that was me. We ran. I don't remember where, just that we stayed ahead of the hum. It chased us. Grew louder. And with each pulse, I lost a little more of myself. Not to madness. To them. Every echo wanted control. And some didn't ask permission. I broke in Oslo. Idris found me in a bathhouse, surrounded by flickering runes I hadn't written. My eyes glowed gold. My voice wasn't mine, but he stayed. He pulled me back. Just anchor to one thing, he whispered. One memory that's yours alone. I tried, and I found it. Margot, age 8, holding my hand after I scraped my knee on the garden step, whispering, "Don't cry, Nana says we're meant to bleed. It means the story's still going." I breathed, and the echoes quieted. That night, Idris showed me what he'd hidden since Prague. A letter. From Elias. Dated 20 years before either of us had been born. It read, "Asterisk. If the cycle breaks and the seed blooms early, look for the mirror flame. It will rise in the city where silence was once sacred. Asterisk." We looked at each other, then whispered the name at the same time. Coing gradio arids to enredas. Coing gradio arids twain gradio sustere gradio soft tho. Thexrad theoadiosides twain gradio soft tho aros. Thexrad theoadio and rosteri. We arrived during a sandstorm. The air buzzed with energy. At night, the stars over the old city pulsed in ways they shouldn't have, and near the garden tomb I found another mark, the thorned circle, burned into a stone, fresh. And below it, in blood, asterisk asterisk, the key returns, the vault breathes. The vault, not a place, a convergence point. We followed the signs, and deep beneath the Church of St. Anne, in an ossuary long sealed to the public, we found the final door. It wasn't locked. It didn't open. It just was normal boz when normor mocked. And when I stepped through, I became the seed. I can't describe what happened after. Only that when I came back, Idris was gone. And I wasn't alone. The echoes stood around me, flesh and bone, eyes glowing, all of them, my ancestors, my shadows, my protectors. And at the center, Margot, smiling. You were always the end, she said, and the beginning. She placed her hand over my chest, where the 13th scar had been, and whispered, Tom's asterisk flare. Asterisk. The world burned, and then was born anew. The world did not burn in flame. It burned in memory. In cities, people began to remember things they'd never lived. They whispered names they'd never heard. Dreams bled into waking life. Across oceans and hemispheres, strangers hummed the same lullaby at the same time. The seed had bloomed, and I had become its soil. The first week after the flare, no one noticed. Not really. There were murmurs on Reddit, threads on old forums, video clips of people collapsing in the middle of subway platforms, eyes glazed with light. But in a world addicted to crisis, it blurred into background noise. Only those of us who remembered the vault, the flame, the circle, we knew. We could feel it. The shift. It was in the air, the way it shimmered at dawn, in the way birds stopped singing just before 3:14 a.m. each night, in the way our reflections lingered half a second longer than we did. I found Idris again in Fez. He hadn't died. Not exactly. He'd scattered. Pieces of him had flared off during the bloom, absorbed into cities, into poems, into static on forgotten radio towers. I found his face painted onto a wall by a street artist who swore he'd never seen the man. But when I touched it, Idris spoke. Not aloud. In pulse. The vault didn't seal, it opened, it became, asterisk. Became what? I asked aloud, my hand still on the wall. His voice hummed behind my ribs. A corridor, between possible pasts, between echo and root, and they're not done with you. I started to unravel after that. Not fully, not visibly. But timelines bled. I would fall asleep in Paris and wake in a salt cave in Chile, hands covered in ash. I lost 4 days in Istanbul and found notes I had written in a dialect that hasn't existed for 1,200 years. I stopped carrying my old phone. The screen pulsed with messages that hadn't been written yet, and I couldn't risk anyone tracing me, because something was still hunting me. Not the thorn circle, not anymore. They had scattered like insects in firelight. This was older. Something Elias once called the fallow. Not a group. A force. The part of the seed that rejects growth. The silence between generations. The cold. It had followed the flare. And it wanted balance. I was in Patagonia when I met the twins. 2 girls, no older than 12. They spoke in harmony, finished each other's sentences. One would draw while the other dreamed. When they touched my arm, my scars glowed. You carry the final stem, they said. Stem? You are no longer the seed. You are the bridge, the root that sprouts or dies, the line that bends the timeline forward. Then what happens if I break? The drawing sister tilted her head. Then everything loops, and the thorned circle returns as fruit. I left that night, alone again. I headed north toward Bolivia, chasing another flare point that Idris's wall message had shown me in a glimpse of static. But the road was no longer linear. At dusk, the sky would fracture. I'd walk into fog and emerge into markets that hadn't existed for centuries. A woman in Peru handed me a necklace made of bone and told me to give it to the echo in your throat. I wore it. And Margot began to speak again. They're trying to fracture the root, she said. Who? Not who, what? The remnant. The remnant wasn't a person. It wasn't even singular. It was the memory of those who had refused the seed. Echoes of denial. They lived in silence, in fracture, in apathy. And now, with the flare fully awakened, they were rising to drown it. They whispered through algorithms, infected language, burned memories, and I could feel them growing. The only way to stop them was to return to the origin, not of the seed, of Tnesev, the Canara Tneft in Shadares, Camden. The city was quieter than I remembered. I found Mum still in the same house. She didn't recognize me, not because I had changed physically, because I carried too much light. She blinked slowly and said, "You look like her." Who? Nana, right before she left. I sat with her for hours. We didn't speak much, but when I left, she pressed something into my palm. A ring, carved with the 13th symbol. She said, "You'd need this." I put the ring on. The sky darkened. The remnant screamed. And all 13 scars flared to life. Not pain. Preparation. The final vault wasn't a place. It was an asterisk act. A choosing. And it was time. I didn't know what the act would be. I only knew it would cost everything. The moment I placed the ring on my finger, the flare cycle entered its final phase. The sky didn't change. The ground didn't split. The world didn't explode into sound or light. Instead, it remembered Psalm. All of it. At once. In Rome, statues wept. In Singapore, children drew spirals on whiteboards and asked to speak to the sky. In Sao Paulo, a priest dropped his sermon mid-verse and began reciting lines from the Codex in a language never transcribed. In Camden, my mother opened her eyes at 3:14 a.m. and whispered, "It's her now, not us." And across 13 flare cities, root-bearers old and new turned to the east and waited. Because I was the key. And the lock had turned. The world didn't stop spinning. But time did. Just for a moment. Just long enough for everyone to hear the choice. It didn't come in words. It came in memory. In possibility. A question, pressed against every soul like a fingerprint of fire. Times asterisk, will you carry the inheritance? Asterisk. Some said no, and forgot. Fell back into the river of now, with no awareness they'd ever climbed the shore. But others said yes, and changed. The remnant didn't scream this time. It didn't fight. It trembled, because the inheritance wasn't central anymore. It wasn't locked to vaults or vessels or even the Codex. It had scattered, not diluted. Nuns multiplied, like seeds blown into open earth. And now, wherever people dared to remember, to wonder, to dream, to bleed for truth, the seed answered. But I wasn't finished, because I still carried the first scar, and in me lived everything that came before. I had walked the vaults, fused with the echoes, burned in the flare. And now I had to choose what to do with the root. It couldn't be me forever. No one mind could bear this forever. I returned to St. Vincent's. The place where this had all begun, where Nana whispered stories, where I first opened a hidden stair with a key that wasn't supposed to exist. The ivy was gone. The chapel cleaned. Inside, people were already gathering. No fanfare, no religion, no banners, just memory, just possibility. They had come from everywhere. Aika, now reborn, voice like bells. Idris, his pulse in step with the earth. Astrid, no longer dreaming, weaving Zeke. And Margot, not whole, but here, as a shimmer, a guide. My sister, my other self. I stood in the circle where the dais once rose, held up the ring, and asked the only question that mattered. Do you remember enough to begin again? The silence answered. Not yes. Not no. Just forward. I placed the ring in the center and stepped back. The 13 gathered around it, and the route moved on. Out of me. Into the world. No longer one bearer. Many. Scattered. Balanced. And I finally rested. Not in death. Into Bus. Release. Today you remember something you've never lived. A locket. A word in a forgotten tongue. A door in a dream. That's not coincidence. It's inheritance. It's you. It's always been you. Taxmina Lakis. Welcome to the memory. Carry it well. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.